Oh, Bokeh. Oh my goodness, yes, Bokeh. My goodness, let me show you Bokeh. That is another very, very cool thing we can do. I might, shall I use him for this? I can use him for the Bokeh. Since we've already made the magic slider here, we can give him a crazy expression and make him jump. That's fine. All on one page, on one. Yeah, let's do that. Let's give him. Let's use him to do the Bokeh. So Bokeh, I don't know if you're familiar with that terminology. It's those fuzzy little out of focus dots that you see sometimes in the background, sometimes in the foreground of certain things. If you animate them, they look really cool. And it's something that we can easily do in Photoshop, like as a post-production effect. But we don't have to. We can use it in DAZ Studio and natively render it out and just use depth of field to create the same effect. Very, very cool idea to do that. Let me use him as a I mean, it's not great, but maybe we'll just give him some kind of bokeh effect when we frame him up. So let's go and save my scene here. I'll do that first. That directory is getting rather large of DAZ projects here. I'll call it Bokeh. This is how you spell it. Some people also call it Bokeh or something else. I don't really know what it's pronounced as, but I'll call the scene Jump Guy V1. And I'll go, I don't need the timeline for this, so I'll go and close that down and create myself a new camera. Maybe just showing him like that, like he's a superhero and he's in the middle of jumping here. Create a new camera, copy the active viewport, change over to that camera, show my aspect frame. So I'll go and have him. I'll just zoom into him like that, but I don't want to do it by being too close to him with the camera. I want to have the camera slightly further away from him and go and turn that focal length into something like 200. So the more I do that, the more the depth of field will take. This is something that's I don't think this is a great pose, but you get the picture as soon as we see him. So maybe this is our framing. Let's do that. This is our magically framed up camera now. That's nice. And I'll go back to my perspective view. So this is important to know. I'm going to shoot him slightly from the bottom here, which means that my bokeh particles, they need to appear kind of behind him here, so that he's in focus, but anything that's over here will be out of focus. So yes, that's kind of the magic. And I'll do that with Howie Fark's super amazing Ultra Scatter add-on, because that is the one thing that'll make me these particles. So you can do the same in Blender or with any other things, and I'm not going to use any other tools for this, just all in DAZ Studio. So the bokeh particles, they're tiny little flakes that are randomly distributed and just presented out of focus at the back. Thank you, Julia. Very nice. So for that, we need to, first of all, make ourselves a particle. Let me go and switch that aspect frame off again. Keep these guys where they are. I'll go and save my scene, and I'll go and create myself a new primitive. And that's just going to be a plane, which will be my particle. It's going to be super nice and tiny. So this is just going to be 0.01 meters. I suppose centimeters is probably a better way to describe that. It's going to be 1 centimeter. One centimeter, that's it. And it's just going to be square. So I'll call that particle, just so that I remember what that is. There's a camera clipping issue. If you go too close to it, you barely see it's a square. So I have to be kind of here. It'll be fine the way it is. Whoops. It'll be fine the way it is, but it'll be even better if we make it not square, if we just turn it into a bit of a rounded thing. And the easiest way to make that happen in DAZ Studio is to apply a subdivision surface modifier. So let's go over to create. No, not actually create, it's edit, object, geometry, since you don't really go into these menus very often, convert to sub D. And that applies what Blender knows as a subdivision surface modifier. And when we do that, we can see that my little plane has been turned into kind of a more rounded palette thing, and that's better. That's better for us to use. This is the same thing that I was talking about earlier with the, and that's the crab again, very nice. This is the same thing I was talking about earlier with this little icon from the scene tools set. If I click that, it'll turn this into low resolution as well. So if I don't do that, it'll turn my figure into low res, but it's also essentially on the thing that I've just created, it'll just switch the subdivision surface modifier off and turn it into base resolution. And if I switch this back over, then it'll turn back into high resolution. So that's where that is, and this is where that's happened. So under mesh resolution, this option here, we didn't have that before. I applied the subdivision surface modifier. And if I switch this back to base, the thing is going to be a square again. And if I turn this back into high res, it'll be this again. I like it to be kind of a rounded palette. And this is going to be the one particle that we're going to go and replicate many times over in the background of our figure. So let's go and make ourselves another primitive that will be behind my figure, and that's the one into which we're going to replicate all these particles. So head over to create new primitive, make it a cube this time. Could be anything, but a cube is probably the simplest thing to grasp. I will make that 1 meter with 1 division, so nice and plain and simple. We can always scale it up. There it is. It's going to be an invisible object, by the way. I'll put that back here, and just so that it's in the camera as well, I might go and make that bigger as well. It doesn't, the color of the cube doesn't really matter. We're not going to see it. We're just going to use it as a container, really, to have something happening inside it. So I'll put this cube up so that when I look through my camera, basically the cube is behind this, filling out the picture here. It might actually be a little bit too big, so I'd probably get away with making that cube smaller. We can play with this later. That's quite nice too. Yeah, so now I need to move my guy, I suppose, over, is it in the X? Yeah, there we go. So it's just making sure that the whole cube and nothing but the cube is kind of behind him, like so. And it'll become clear why I'm doing that in a minute. So this looks ugly and it's not great, but the moment we go and, well, rename that first, and I'll call this guy volume. The moment I add my particles into it, that's where the fun is really going to begin. So go and select the particle in the scene tab, and then head over and go open that ultra scatter magic script. I think it's under utilities, is it somewhere down here? Yes, ultra scatter, that's the one. Let's go and with the particle selected, double click ultra scatter, and I have the Pro version, which has support for volumes and for matrices. So this one that we can't see, that is just called surfaces. And I think there's 2 versions of Ultra Scatter around this, Ultra Scatter Advanced and Pro. And Advanced will work if you want to use the same effect with a plane, you can do that. But I prefer to do this with a volume. At the moment I click volume, it just goes and disappears here. So this is our scatter object, the particle, and we're going to select the target node now into which the thing is going to be replicated via the magic of instances, and this plugin takes care of it all for us. So select my volume as the target. So the object you select in the scene tab is the one that is the scatter object, and the one we want to put it into is the target object. So in my case, it's the volume. The number of instances / iterations, let's make it 1,000, just for kicks. And the distribution and the scaling, I'm going to leave alone for now. We're going to mess with that. You can make them bigger and smaller. You can do the rotation. Actually, rotation I will work with, because it's a flat plane. I don't want it to be replicated as is everywhere. I want this to be turned in all 3 axes in total random values. So I'll go and crank X, Y, and Z up to 180, all of them. And that's really all I need to do. I could go with the scaling and the distribution. I'll do that maybe in a moment. I'll go and just hit volume scatter and let ultra scatter do its thing. Thank you, Brian. Yes, very nice. See if you can pin that message now, Brian. If you click this little 3 dots icon, I believe that pins the message at the top of the chat. Let's see if it works. Okay, so that has now, oh yeah, there's one other thing that's happened, and I didn't quite talk about it. The target volume has been hidden, and that has happened because when I did this, double click the ultra scatter, there was this option that was enabled, hide the target. So it'll automatically make that cube invisible that we view. So I didn't actually speak about this. And my values are still intact because I was on the ultra scatter particle group here. So there we go. So that's now invisible. It's kind of what we want. And what we currently can't see is the particles themselves. That's only because they're very tiny, but there's definitely 1,000 in there. So if I go and zoom in, I can see the effect. It looks like cosmic dust. And also as you move closer, you can see that they're all turned any which way, and that's really what I was after. So that's all my dust in the background now. So now if I go to my camera, I can see all these specks of dust in the background. So that's kind of cool. Let me go and save all this out, just so that in case things happen that we don't really want them to happen. Jump guy v2 now with particles. Let's see what that looks like rendered in Iray. Keeping in mind I only have the default HDRI active right now, so the lighting isn't going to be great. So we're going to fix that in a moment. But yes, this is what I can see. I can see all kinds of particles in the background here. That looks already very cool. So if you're building a space scene, this would be a great way to denote, hey, there's more than one planet out there. So for this to really become bokeh, they need to be out of focus here rather than just be crisp and sharp. And to do that, I'll go switch over to filament. I'll go to my top viewport, where I'll choose my camera, and under the parameters tab or on the cameras tab, whichever way you want to work with, I'll turn on depth of field, and that'll give me some additional lines here. That's this little bit that just appeared here, just right about where he is. As I switch on depth of field, I get this little box here, and that is now movable either with this little ball here or with the focal length parameter. So as I do that, whoops, not the focal length, sorry, it's the focal distance parameter. If I move that, I can pick out what part of my scene I'd like to be in absolute focus. So I'm going to go and put this on his eyes here, maybe like so, and I'll leave the f-stop at 22. Lower values will increase the depth of field, higher values will decrease the depth of field. So as I do that, these two planes, they're going to move and move out from one another or move further into one another. So we get more or less. So as I increase that, this is going to be a bigger depth of field, whereas this is a smaller depth of field. And that's kind of what I want. So back on the camera, if I go and render this now in Iray, we should see lots of fluffy particles. It looks like the depth of field is so shallow that all my particles seem to either disintegrate or not really show up. So I'll go and make my depth of field a bit bigger, and you can see that they are still trying to render. They're not very big, and they're also not very pronounced. But we can see that we're kind of getting into this bokeh direction. I actually think it'll look really good with a shallower depth of field, and perhaps with slightly larger particles. So let me go and see if I can make that happen. There's another thing that you can do. You can make the particles, and maybe I'll use 100 just for now. You can pick the particle and give the particle an emission channel. That could be very cool. So anything other than, currently they don't emit any light, and they don't have to. I should really just be able to hit them with a light and shine a light through them. But let's just see what happens if I go and make them slightly yellow and emit light. You can see that they do show up more two-sided light is on, but we don't really see them because nothing is really hitting them. So we want to really have a little contrast that kind of hits them from angles and makes them show up. So let's make that happen. I might actually go and turn my window into 2 viewports so that I can keep an eye on this while meddling with that in the perspective view. So this guy, he needs a bit of light anyway, so we'll deal with him later. Let's make the bokeh show up first of all. We want the bokeh to show on camera, so I'm going to give it one light from here, one spotlight. Create spotlight, there we go. From active viewport, transform this. And with the spotlight, so this is I'm going to call this the bokeh light. And on the parameters tab under constraints, I want to make that point at a volume so that it goes and just always points at the volume here. And that's quite nice. Points at the volume from a funky angle. So now we need the correct light value. I don't really know what that might be, but I'll turn it to 100,000 for now. See what that does. Certainly makes the bokeh particles show up a little bit, but not quite enough. Let's increase it. It's getting there, but it's still not really doing it for me. So I'll increase it by 10 every time, and now I can see the particles coming out here. That's quite nice. So that's, you know, bokeh happening there. Hello, Mr. Rel. No problem. Always good to have you. It doesn't matter how early or how late you show up. So hey, that's bokeh. That's the beginnings of bokeh here, and I think this bokeh light is nice. We're gonna go and leave it as it is. I'll go and increase my depth of field a little bit because that will make these particles just more out of focus. And I'll do that by selecting the camera. On the camera parameters, I'll go and turn the f-stop right down. So I have a feeling that maybe the default of 20 was probably not such a bad idea. Maybe 50. 50 that's good for now. And you can see all these bokeh particles showing up. If they're not big enough for us, we can just make them a little bit larger. So if you want larger bokeh, then that's really not that big an issue with ultra scatter. You can just go and change the parameters. So let's see, I'll leave Iray enabled. I don't know if that's a good idea. I'd select my particle first of all. Particle is so small. Come on, buddy, where are you? There we go, that's the particle, super tiny. I'll go and make him just a bit larger. So I think I'll make him maybe like, just to emphasize the whole process, I'm gonna make him 400% now. And does this automatically reflect all the other instances as I make this guy larger? Yeah. Then I go select the ultra scatter volume here, or the ultra scatter group rather, double click ultra scatter again, and just have it scatter the whole thing again. I might also add a bit of random scaling. So we've got the random rotation, but not the scaling. So for that, I say make it a little smaller as well as larger, and add the variance to 100%. And now volume scatter this again. Give it a moment. See what happens. Let's make it 500 instead. So it looks like I have to do this. I have to change the particle, and then I go over back to ultra scatter, double click this, and then just go and scatter the whole thing again. And that will, it looks like that, only that will change the size of the particles, not just changing the particle itself. It looks like it. Yeah, there we go, perfect. So these are now getting much bigger, and this is kind of more the effect that I wanted. It's also not quite the size I wanted, so I think 500 is still way too large. So maybe we'll make it 250, and then ultra scatter that again. We're nearly there with our bokeh, so I'll go and make my depth of field much lower, so that'll create that exciting effect then in the back there. So on my camera, on my parameters tab, often I have the camera tab split out, because it just gives me one easy access point to those settings. Yeah, so this is kind of a nice bokeh. I'm thinking this is kind of nice. And this is the effect I was going to show you. They're a little bit brighter than him, so he isn't lit yet, so he needs a bit of light, but we can make that happen. We give him one light from here, so we get a bit of separation on here. This has already been taken care of to a certain extent with the bokeh light. So I can see that already. He just needs a little bit of fill-in from the front, maybe from the side actually. If I go onto my environments tab here and drop that down to 0.3, that illuminates his face here a little bit, and I'll just give him one side light from here. I think I might do that. I'm also inclined to make the depth of field even smaller. So let's call it, well, 1 is that's a bit much, isn't it? I was going to say 12. Or 8 or 16. Let's stick with photography terms. 16 is good. You can also change the color of the bokeh particles. That's also possible. You can create yourself 3 or 4 particles that each have a different color, and then let ultrascatter replicate all of those as a group, and then there's kind of a different type of color randomly in the background. It's also a great idea. I'll let you work that one out, just so that we have a tiny bit of color here. Currently this is the base color. We also have that emission shader that I don't know if we need that now that we have the light. Let's switch that off. That makes it a bit darker already. And let's give it, I don't know, maybe red. This is red good. Look at that. That's kind of nice. That's already very cool. Let's give him some handsome. We've got that separation going here already. I don't really need to worry about that. I'll give him one light from the side, and then, you know, our man is ready for render. My goodness, key properties and all. That is very, very cool.